Krishna Gopa Govinda Shama Kunda Radha Jai Jai Ganga Jamuna Tulsi Bhakti Devi Jai Ananda Gauri Vaishnava Jai Sanatana Bhakti Jai Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Guru Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Nityanamane. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravadi Prashadane Nirvachya Shunyavadi Bhastakare Shatarane Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Veda Gadadhar Gauravadi Pravinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna Bhagavad Canto 9 chapter 19 verse 4. Tasya udaranopayam
Tasya udaranopayam
Basta kami vichintayam
Basta kami vichintayam
Yadatta tirtam udritya
Yadatta tirtam udritya
Shanagrena rodasi
Shanagrena rodasi Tasya udaranopayam Basta kami vichintayam Yadatta tirtam udritya Vishanagrena rodasi Tasya udaranopayam Bastahakami vichintayam Yadatta tirtam udritya Vishanagrena rodasi Tasya udaranopayam Bastahakami vichintayam Yadatta tirtam udritya Vishanagrena rodasi Tasya udaranopayam Bastahakami vichintayam Yadatta tirtam udritya Vishanagrena rodasi Tasya udaranopayam Bastahakami vichintayam Yadatta tirtam udritya Vishanagrena rodasi Tasya udaranopayam Bastahakami vichintayam Yadatta tirtam udritya Vishanagrena rodasi Tasya
of the she-goat Udaranopayam
Udaranopayam means deliverance. Basta he-goat
Kami having lusty desires Vichintayam planning Yadatta execute Tirtam a way to come out Udritya digging the earth Vishanagrena by the point of the horns rodasi at the edge of the well. Translation: at the planning how to get the she-goat out of the well, the lusty he-goat dug up the earth on the well's edge with the point of his horns in such a way that she was able to come out very easily. For attraction for women is evidence for economic development, housing, and many other things, and for living comfortably in this material world. Digging up the earth to make a way out for the she-goat was a laborious task, but before accepting the she-goat, the he-goat underwent this labor. Aho kriya kshatta sutta vidajanasya mohoyam aham mamehi. The union between male and female provides the impetus for gaining a nice partner, ugly income, children, and friends. That's one of the entangled in this material world. Translation: after finding how to get the she-goat out of the well, the lusty he-goat dug up the earth on the well's edge with the point of his horns in such a way that she was able to come out very easily. So this is Yati actually relating his own experience, not saying it directly, but through the example of a goat and a she-goat caught in the well. So this obviously refers to himself rescuing the woman from the well and then marrying her, etc. And then developing great attraction. So we have here the Prabhupada here quotes from the Bhagavatam how the person develops attraction. Through attraction he expands his needs to house, land, family, members, etc., and wealth, and under the concept of I and mine. So one of the factors, of course, is family life. It's not the only thing, but family life is one of the major factors that does this. But it has its roots, actually, in the jiva's existence in the material world under ignorance. So we can't blame simply the family. The family is simply a reflection of a deeper urge of the jiva. So the jiva is called bahirmukha. This means that he's turned his face away, technically, bahirmukha, externally, which means not towards the Lord, but towards material energy. Or we can say before that, even before turning before material energy, he has excluded the Lord from his interest completely and is simply considering himself, and therefore he turns towards material energy for enjoyment. So this is the nature of the jivas in the material world. It may be animals or plants or human beings or devas or whatever. As long as they have a body in the material world, that indicates that they have this tendency to enjoy. So here the words aham mameti were mentioned, I and mine. So the real I is there anyway. One cannot remove the I in the jiva. Whether it's in the spiritual world or in the material world, the sense of I is there. So that is essential to the jiva, that sense of I. And similarly, mama, once we have an I, then we look at things in the world and we try to possess them, and they become mine. In the spiritual world, the I exists also. What is the difference? The mind is related to Krishna. Krishna is mind. So that's the big difference. One possesses Krishna instead of anything material. But the only way one can possess Krishna is not to have desires for one's own enjoyment. So in the material world, it's the opposite. One desires enjoyment, and therefore one develops possessiveness of material objects. So this is how aham and mama operate in the material world. Spiritual world is also there, but it is different. So the spirit in the spiritual world, every jiva is directing himself towards Krishna's interest. In the material world, it is self-interest. So the jiva turns towards material energy to get enjoyment for his material body. To do that, he needs a little mechanism. So the little mechanism is, he gets a body, or two bodies actually, the subtle body and the gross body, by which the jiva can enjoy matter, because the jiva himself is spiritual, so he needs an intermediary to somehow communicate with matter. So he develops material bodies, gross and subtle. And to experience the enjoyment, he develops an identity with the material body.
So in other words, the sense of I transfers from the jiva to that material body, gross and subtle. So the I still exists in the Atman, but it transfers its identity to the body. So we call it the false ego. So this is a very subtle aspect of the jiva's relationship with the material world, very essential. But even that is based upon this idea that the jiva maintains its separateness from the Lord. So based on the separateness of the Lord, which is his ignorance, then he develops the ahankara, by which he identifies with the material body, and then he enjoys in the material world with his body, and thinking I am enjoying because the body is enjoying. So that is the mechanism by which the jiva operates in the material world. The origin is the jiva's desire to enjoy. And then he develops a material aham mama. And this expands in different ways in the material world. So in Bhagavad Gita it says that it arises from duality, dvanda. So that dvanda is duality of itcha and dvesha, like and dislike. So these are focusing ultimately, is one is a reflection of the other. Desire is one thing, and what doesn't please us is a dislike. Or desire and hatred, or desire and anger, etc. So the duality is expressed in different ways in the material world. But it actually arises from that first thing, the desire to enjoy, or the kama. So that expands in different ways in the material world in terms of possessions, house, land, relatives, family members, wealth, etc. All these are expansions of that basic desire. So often the family is condemned because of this, because it gives a great opportunity for that type of enjoyment. And because this is such a great danger, then there are all sorts of restrictions put on this in the varnashram system. So for grihastha life, there's lots of restrictions. So that this mama, desire for possession, etc., does not go to extremes. And therefore, with those restrictions, the person is supposed to renounce later on and become a vanaprastha sannyasi. So that is the whole idea behind the restrictions. Hope that the person can eventually renounce those possessive things. Right? So the first stage is to get rid of the attachments. So therefore, the man goes to the forest. He leaves his house, he leaves his family members, he leaves his wealth, he leaves his comforts, he leaves society. So that's separation to stop this possessiveness, this mind, feeling of mind. That's the first step. But of course, it's not a complete thing. Simply developing detachment from possessions is one thing. One must also develop attachment for the Supreme Lord. So then the next stage is sannyas, in which one concentrates on meditating on the Supreme Lord. That's the traditional system, or on Brahman, or whatever. So, therefore, that's the Vedic, or the Varnashram system of progress out of the Grihastha ashram, or whatever. But, as Bhagavad Gita says, you may renounce, but still you have the desires in the mind. So this is a formality, a formal procedure of going to vanaprastha and sannyas from grihastha life. But it is not a guarantee that it will produce detachment. Definitely it's favorable for detachment, it may not produce detachment. Therefore, Krishna says, even if you renounce everything, you still got the attachment in your mind. So you're a vanaprastha and you're thinking back of your family life all the time. So it may not operate properly. Hopefully it will, but sometimes it doesn't if this attachment is very strong. So therefore one has to be quite qualified even to take vanaprastha in order that this operates properly, and you become detached and you forget about all of these things. So this also requires that the grihastha life be carried out quite strictly, so that one does not develop too much attachments there. And therefore, at a certain stage, one is willing to and quite eager to renounce those attachments. So the whole system requires quite great attention, understanding the goal. So if the grihastha doesn't understand the goal of that varnashram system, he'll never he'll never get to the stage of willingly taking a vanaprastha or a sannyas ashram. He won't do that. Okay. So the system has to be quite nicely instituted with an understanding of those goals. And when those goals get lost, then the whole system doesn't really work properly. So this is one system of dealing with this idea of I and mine and how to get rid of it by forcibly, we could say, going through the ashramas and detaching people from the things, provided they are qualified. The other process is, as I said, to replace the possessiveness. Not to stop the material possessiveness, but cultivate simultaneously possessiveness to Supreme Lord, attachment to the Supreme Lord. So that is the process of bhakti. So even when one is a householder, one can practice bhakti and develop attachment to the Lord. If there is attachment to the Lord, that means there must be some detachment from material. Attachment to the Lord means we're attached to the Lord, not for myself, but for the Lord's pleasure. So to that extent, we have less attachment to material enjoyment for ourselves. So this is the natural process of detachment, not the formal system of going through grihastha and then vanaprastha and sannyas. It is a natural system based upon replacing the lower caste by higher caste, as Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita. So, and we don't start at the sannyas ashram after we've got rid of all of our detachments. You start anytime. Cultivating attachment to the Lord and decreasing the attachments to material energy. So that is why the process of bhakti is more practical than this system. Because we can start very early. And in fact, Prahlad says you start when you're 5 years old. You start very young practicing. Of course, Prahlad is a very good example because from birth he was completely attached to the Supreme Lord and not attached to anything in the material world, including his own father and mother. So, therefore, the process of bhakti is favorable in all circumstances, whether one is young, whether one is middle-aged, whether one is old, whether one is a brahmachari, vanaprastha, grihastha, sannyasi, whether one is inside the varnashram system, outside the varnashram system. It applies to all people, and it gives the result. That is detachment from the material world, detachment from the dualities of material world, etc. And more important, it gives attachment to the Supreme Lord. So it doesn't end with simply detachment. It's a process of simultaneously developing attachment to the Lord. So this is the recommended process for developing the sense of complete rejection of this material world and all the problems that are in it. So, Yayati, unfortunately, though he was coming from a great line of kings, developed extreme attachment. But then he understood after 1,000 years that this attachment was actually his downfall. And therefore, he gives the story here of how he fell into the clutches of this she-goat, whatever, in the well, and rescued her, etc., and developed all sorts of problems because of that. It's a little late, of course, to realize this after 1,000 years, but he did eventually realize his great mistake of family attachment, etc. So, to help the process, therefore we have Scripture itself, which will tell us the problems involved in the material world. And therefore we have a story like this. Or in the 5th canto, we have the whole story of the man going to the forest and experiencing all sorts of problems in the forest and trying to get wealth in the forest. And he encounters thieves, etc., rocks cut his feet, thorns scratch his body, animals attack him, etc. And all sorts of problems happen in the forest of material enjoyment. So these are stories to educate us. So even if we don't experience the problems of material life, and particularly our household life, by reading these stories we can get some education. And if we're intelligent, then we avoid. If we're not intelligent, then of course we partake, and then after some time we realize, oh, this isn't so nice, as Yayati realized later on. So, Bhagavatam therefore presents these stories to give us a warning and educate people, either to prevent this from happening, or if it is happening, to realize it is happening and stop the process immediately. So, two things can be done, of course, once we realize. One is to correctly follow the varnas and ashramas, and as grihasthas follow properly, so that later on we can renounce. And the second and even greater recommendation is the performance of bhakti. So, one can do the two things simultaneously. There's not a problem in doing that. Therefore, often we see the associates of Lord Chaitanya, they were following the varnashram system, but simultaneously they were practicing bhakti. So there is no problem for that, and in fact it can be favorable. And in fact, the system becomes easier. The varnashram system becomes easier with the performance of bhakti because one begins to develop detachment. So therefore it's much easier to follow all those rules without any problems. And the more detached one becomes, the less likely one is to break the rules or to miss simple activities. So that for even the varnashram system becomes easier by combining with the process of bhakti. So this was the usual procedure in Lord Chaitanya's movements. They would follow the system and simultaneously do the bhakti, etc. Some persons may feel that even this system is an obstacle to their bhakti. As we see in the case of Mother Vendor Puri praying that what is the use of the Tapadas, worshiping the Devatas, doing all this, I'm going to stop with all this stuff. Simply worship the Supreme Lord. All this is an impediment. I waste too much time following all these duties. So then he said, renounce all of this, now simply meditate on the Supreme Lord and worship the Supreme Lord. So, at a certain point, those activities may be an obstacle in the sense of one wants to spend more time doing bhakti and less time doing rituals and stuff of varnashram system, etc. So, that is provided for in the Gaudiya system with the Babajis. They renounce everything, all the varnas and all the ashramas. And they're supposed to concentrate simply upon worship of the Lord, chanting His name, worshiping the Lord, meditating on the Lord, serving the Lord, etc. Full time. But that's also a rare, more of a rare example. So, most of the Lord Chaitanya's followers, and after that the descendants, were following the system as grihasthas, etc. So we have some rare examples of Babajis or whatever who follow that system. So, in this way, there is a provision also for developing complete dedication to the process of bhakti as well. So, therefore, the system can be done, the varnashram system can be done, as we see in the case of the followers of Lord Chaitanya, or if one is qualified, then it can also be rejected, either way. So, though Lord Chaitanya rejected in many ways the Varnashram system when he was speaking to Ramananda and Madhvas, etc., we see, practically speaking, he didn't reject it either, because he took the sannyas, he followed the sannyas ashram vows as much as possible, and very strictly, and his followers were also following Grihastha ashram, namely some were sannyasis as well. So, therefore, they did follow as much as possible. So, this was following to the extent that it was favorable for the development of bhakti. If a person is already successful in bhakti, let's say he's already got bhava or prema, what does he do? So, he can follow the system or not follow the system. That's his choice. He may follow the system, set an example for others. That's all. As we see in the case of Lord Chaitanya's followers, who are siddhas anyway. Or he may reject completely out of simply attachment to the Supreme Lord, Manandina. So both of those are alternatives there for one who has developed great attachment to the Lord. He may continue to follow the system for these reasons of setting an example for others. So therefore it's not necessarily an obstacle. But the main idea of rejection by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he called it external, irrelevant in one sense, because his main goal is not attachment to the Supreme Lord, in that sense. Whereas the processes of bhakti, and particularly the higher processes of bhakti, attachment, great attachment to the Supreme Lord, they are very, very powerful processes and quick processes to get perfection. So therefore they're given more importance. So his rejection was in terms of the main goals of those systems in themselves. They don't produce bhakti or whatever like that. So therefore their rejection is there. So in any case, we see the kings here, like Yati, they did follow the system as much as possible. And at the same time, hopefully, they were able to practice bhakti and through that get success. So here, Yati realizes his mistake finally, and he begins to rectify himself after 1,000 years. So if he had the fortune of getting a great devotee's mercy earlier on, he probably would have realized this much earlier.
Usually it happens that in this material world, when a person commits a mistake, then when he's caught, or then he realizes that he made a mistake. We find in Yati's example. So unless you do the mistake, he feels guilty, then he reveals. But in Kali Yuga, there are many devotees. When the police catches a robber, even after 30 degree punishment, the thief doesn't agree.
Well, that's a matter of intelligence. We say the person who learns simply by knowledge without having to experience, then good. He learns that you go to jail if you steal, so he doesn't steal. It's not that everybody has to go to jail first and then learn that I don't steal. So that's one. The second one is he does get punished, then he learns that's bad, therefore he doesn't want to get punished, therefore he doesn't steal anymore. The third category is even he gets punished, he goes back and steals again. He doesn't learn even if he gets punished. So even he gets a bad experience, he still does the same thing again because he can't control himself and he's in very, very ignorance. So the more one is in the mode of goodness, then the more he can simply absorb the rules by knowledge and follow them. Which would indicate that in past lives he's got the experiences already, so therefore he's already experienced this, so therefore he doesn't need to anymore. And sattva good means detachment. So he has minimum of attachments in the material world. He's not interested in enjoying much in the material world, so therefore these rules make sense to him. Naturally follows them. Whereas the person in the mode of passion, he has more difficulty. But he will follow if he sees there's better enjoyment at the end. A person in mode of ignorance doesn't care. He'll try to get immediate enjoyment by any means. But then he suffers.
In this modern world, when people get married, especially in the younger generation, they are very detached. Like, we find many wives coming in telling devotees, my husband is not talking to me, he's very detached. Here we find in the ancient days, they get detached after experiencing many years of marriage. Here, immediately after 1 week or 2 weeks, they get detached.
Maybe they weren't attached in the beginning, who knows? I don't know.
Before getting married, they're all having this dating and they know too much.
Again, what is that attachment or detachment? It's maybe detachment with that particular wife. They're attached to somebody else.
Detachment because of frustration.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean they're completely detached. Just they got disappointed in that type of married life and they thought it was something else. Maybe. It's probably not true detachment. Otherwise, I wouldn't have got married.
Normally see this, but here Yayanti, after experiencing 1,000 years suffering, started taking the devotional process. But can I call him in a category of like a artha? Is artha? 4 kinds of people are there who take the process of Vikram, so it's a pious person. Is artha in a category of artha?
Artha.
Artha and Jignasa. Isn't it artha?
Those are in terms of people who are practicing bhakti. 4 types of devotees who surrender. But those who are in pain, those who are in want material things. So you're saying because he's suffering, then he'll surrender to the Lord? Well, possibly. It doesn't, as I said, it doesn't really say what he did here. He just got liberated. It doesn't say actually what he did.
You said that he was disgusted.
Yeah.
In the sense of enjoyment, then he started taking the process.
Yeah.
So means we can say now, means although he deep sense of
So his impetus is the pain of the material world. Yeah.
But see here, but he didn't get any mercy. But he understood himself that I am suffering, although I am trying to enjoy.
Yeah. Well, that's the whole purpose of karma also. by suffering, then you understand material world's bad and I should do simple activities. Through experience. That, of course, is the lowest level. Experience the suffering, then we realize, don't do it. Higher is, you have this scriptural knowledge, somebody tells you, then you understand, you don't do it anymore.
Normally, it's happened very rare, understanding oneself that I am suffering, because unless they get a higher pleasure, they won't take the process.
Yeah. So that is why generally in the material world, progress is very slow. And therefore the jivas go through lifetimes of Brahma before they realize anything.
Bhanu talked about the same case. When Bhanu talked about beginning, he is Chintamani. Later he goes to Avidra's house. Then he realizes what a mistake he had done and takes his eyes out.
Yeah.
Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srimad Bhanu Maharaj ki jai. Venkateshwara Bhaktivedanta